Okay, so Rambam Bekius, we finished Hilchos Talmud Torah. There's some Talmud Torah today. There's Talmud Torah. There's some Hilchos Talmud Torah today. So we're going to take up the halachos about tearing Kria on your Rav Muvhak and on a chacham. Maybe a couple other things also. Hey, Aaron. And I am choosing this topic because it was very relevant to me over the last 3 days. And so, okay, so Perik Shmini Halacha Aleph. So you'll see why we have to do this in a second. Oh, first of all, this is the basic of Kria. Okay, Aval, I just opened this to a random thing. So a person who's in mourning is obligated to tear over his dead. Okay, and his dead here, this is already in chapter 8, so we've already established that there are 7 relatives who you do availus for, right? So mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, and then spouse, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So Shnemar, as it says, "Uvigdechem lo sifromo v'lo samusa." It says, "Your garments you shall not rend." I guess is probably the fancy translation. V'lo samusa, you shall not die. Okay. What's the context? And also it says you shall not.
This is Moshe and Aaron, where let's see. This is about when they could mourn after another of you died.
Exactly, yeah. So this is, let's just look it up here. Vayikra Yud. So this is right after another of who died. And what was the context of the, like, when did the deaths of none of Avihu happen? Like, what was going on? Yeah, it was on during the Miluim, right? So the inauguration of the Mishkan. So that's the incident happens, right? So they take the fire pans, and then the fire comes out and kills them, and Moshe says his words to Aaron, etc. And then Mishael and Eltzaphan take the bodies out. And then in Halacha Vav, Moshe gives Aaron and Elazar and Itamar instructions. V'yomer Moshe Aaron ul Elazar Itamar banav Aaron's sons. Roshechem al tifrao. Don't. This is a hard one to translate. Don't grow out your hair. Yeah, so there's no good English word for like grow out. You can't like actively. Yeah, don't grow out your hair. And don't. I always want to translate this as fray your garments, but I think maybe I'm just saying that because the first 2 words are F and R. Or yeah, don't rend your garments. That's how I said before. Tear. And you will not die. And God will get angry at the entire assembly. I think you read this as rather. Your brothers, the entire house of Israel, will cry over the burned, the conflagration Asher saw for Hashem, that Hashem burned. Right. So in other words, you guys don't mourn because you guys are doing the avoda, and that overrides this. But so then you go back to the halachos. So don't do these things. So you see that other people are obligated to tear their garments. Right. Yeah. Okay. The in Kria Ella. Neomid, and you can only tear. You can only do Kria when you are standing. Shnemar, as it says. So this is by Vayakam HaMelech v'yikra es begadav, and the king got up and tore his garments. Where is this by? What's this context here? Do you know? Shmuel Beis Yud Gimel. This is in my black hole of. Yeah, is this when David Melech's son dies, or is this when someone? I can look it up.
Yeah.
Shmuel is 2:13:31.
Like, I mean, they're also like
2.
Maybe with Bathsheba. No, maybe with Avner. I'm trying to think of there's the Avner part. There's my gut guess is Avner. I'm saying with this.
Wait, did I just look at the wrong? Oh, I'm in the wrong place. Let's see. So. Yeah, Avshalom. So they were on the way, and the news reached David saying, Hika Avshalom es kol bnei. So Avshalom killed all the king's sons. Not a single one of them remained. And the king got up and rent his garments. And he lay down on the ground. And all of his servants were standing with torn garments. Yeah. Okay. This is in Shmuel Beis 13:30 and 31.
Was that Avshalom's revolution, or was that the original killing?
I don't even know.
Okay.
Not sure. Okay, so then Korea. So from where does one tear? Milafanav. from the front. Okay, now I'm not exactly sure what the garments look like. I think they were like very cloaky, because you'll see from the description. But it's not like ours where you have like the front of the garment looks different than the back. I think you could like reverse it. I think that you'll see that later on. So the yeah. So when he tears from the back, ominat stadium, or from the sides, omilamata, or from the bottom, lo yata yidei chavas Kria, has not fulfilled his obligation of Kria. Ela kohen gadol bilvad, except for the kohen gadol shu porim milamata, who tears from the bottom. Which is always one of those weird halachos when you have like one thing that's not uniform in terms of like the kohen gadol, you know, or something. It's just I don't know why he tears from the bottom. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you don't tear the big tekuna, right? That's strange. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know. Going out Ayin El 7:6. Let's look at that. 7:6. I'm gonna need to open up the. Oh no! We got the new one. We got the new Mishnah Torah. I gotta get into this habit. 7:6. Okay. Kohen Gadol chayav b'chol divrei avelos. Okay, so that's Kohen Gadol is obligated in all matters of mourning. Wow, it's usher for him to tear it from above. U'legadol pera, and to grow out his hair. U'latzeis akar hamita, and to go out after the beer, the thing that the body's on. And all the people come to comfort him at his house. And when they visit him, all the people recline on the earth. And he reclines on a bench. And they say to him when they comfort him, Anu kaparasecha, we are your atonement. And he says to them, Tisbarchu min hashamayim, may you be blessed from heaven. And if he wants to comfort others, Hamamune mimatzao b'socha'am. Hamamune mimatzao b'socha'am. I don't know exactly how to translate that. That the one who is appointed spreads him out among the people. That I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. Let me look at the Chabad sheet. But let me read the last part. Hold on. Where were we here? Too many windows. And of Omer Lahen Tinuchamu, and he says to them Tinuchamu. Okay. While I'm looking for this, by the way, another thing which I forgot when I learned this. So I wouldn't say this is the official yeshiva minhag, but I do know people in yeshiva who say instead of Hamalchim Yanachem Eschem, then they say Min Hashemayim Tinuchamu, because apparently I think that's what the Gemara says.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was at the Shiva house yesterday, then Mrs. Moskowitz said that so this is a side story, but that Rabbi Moskowitz's son Shmuel alav shalom converted to Sephardic. He went in front of Beis Din and like became Sephardic, and his main reason was I think is Rambam, and then also he being in the Seattle community, then he preferred to daven at the Sephardic shul. So he would always that's what Ms. Moskowitz was saying, is that if Shmuel were here, he would tell people that they should say Min Hashemayim Tinuchamu. Yeah.
Right. Then he became a Sephardi or started following only Rambam?
So my guess is probably predominantly Rambam, but doing Seattle Sephardic minhagim. Sorry.
Yeah. As far as we're not Rambam.
Yeah. Yeah, because she also said that he doesn't like a lot of other stuff that crept into Sephardic halacha. Yeah, okay, so it says here, if he desires to comfort others, the deputy has in position. Oh, I was kind of right, spreading them out among the people, and he tells them where to be comforted. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. So we didn't get an answer to our question though, right? About why he tears from the bottom, and why we did see it's usher to tear from on top. Yeah, so he's going kind of the only Kohen Gadol. It's also weird that if it said it's usher for him to do Kria stam, that's somehow more understandable than do Kria from the bottom. Yeah, right. So we'd have to look in the Gemara. I'm not interested in going into that right now, though. Okay, so now back to our parak here. Yeah. Okay. So. Right, so you tear from the front and not the sides and not from the bottom. Okay, kamashira hakera. What is the amount of the tear? Tefach. So 1 tefach, which is hand's breadth. I can never say that singular. What is is samach mem like centimeters? Is that like a weird transliteration? 8 centimeters.
I don't know.
It makes sense, right? 8 centimeters sounds like about a handbreadth, right? Yeah. So very short. The inot tzarich lahavdil safas habeged, and you don't need to separate literally to separate the lip of the beged, which means the footnote Machvilis is inot tzarich likros safas habeged min hatzavar achi part chilik lakan v'chilik lakan. You don't need to tear from the neck of the garment until there's like a portion here and a portion there. Ela dai v'kriya shel charitz b'soch shetach habeged. It's enough to have like an incision. A tear of an incision along the length of the beged, but then the folds remain like together. Like there's certain tears where like it'll remain together, and then there's certain tears where it flops down into 2 like segments. So you don't need to flop it down to 2 segments for this. Yeah, the inotzarich labios office of beged. Okay, mutar lo likro b'kli. It's mutar to tear with an implement, and that implies like the entire thing. Okay. V'yesh lo likro bifnim shlo bifnei adam. So this is an interesting thing. How do you translate yesh lo likro bifnim shlo bifnei adam? There's an ambiguity there.
It's okay to tear privately.
That's what I would have thought, right? So Rambam Bekius. Oh, sorry, hold on a second. Lefikach yesh lo lahachnis yado bifnim v'koreh betzina. Therefore, he can reach his hand inside and tear in private. Yeah.
All right. I'm guessing it's not going to undershirt because otherwise, like, what's
Nope. Yeah, we'll see about the undershirt in a second. But so the Rambam Bekius says interesting thing. Bifnim shtei mashma'uyos. There are 2 implications. B'makom snua, in a private location, that's bifnei shelo bifnim shelo bifnei adam. V'tachas bigdo, and then under his garment. Lahachnis yado bifnim klomer likro es habeged mi bifnim. So in other words, if I had my suit jacket on, I can go. I don't make that exact noise, as opposed to tearing it where people will see me do the tear. Yeah. Okay, and then as Chaim said, you only need to tear your outer garment. For all 7 days, the tear remains in front. And if you want to change clothes, then you can change clothes. Is that machlif reverse? Yeah, if you want to reverse it.
Like putting the shirt around.
No, so it's interesting. So the Machvilis says the way I said. Im rotza lahachliv as bigdo hakarua b'beged acher. If you want to exchange it, then you exchange it for another beged. Ve'eno korea kara acher. You don't tear on the new garment. Yeah, I guess it's evident from the context.
You don't?
Yeah, you don't. Oh well, you'll see why. You'll see why you think you do in a second. Okay. Shekol kara she'eno b'shas chimum eno kara. Any tearing that is not at a time. Chimum literally means like hotness. Okay. It's not talking like model hotness. It's talking about when the emotions are like aroused. Yeah.
The heat of the moment.
In the heat of the moment. Yeah, that's good. That's a good parallel idiom. Yeah. It says like Rambam Bekius says here, when a person is informed of the death of a relative, so when the feelings of pain are beginning to overwhelm him, it's like when Yosef saw his brothers treating Binyamin well, and he says he like restrained his mercies. His mercies were hot,
I don't know if it's not even
yeah, so he says something that gives support to that, but he doesn't mention that, right? Yeah, we'll see that later on. Okay, so far sounds like he's saying universal tearing. Okay, however, and this is where
he said you should wait until after that.
Oh, sorry, yeah, he says
You should not wait.
He says that you don't tear. So he didn't say when you tear yet, right? But he says if you put on another beged, you don't tear the new one, and the reason why is because that tearing would not be a tearing b'shas chimum. It wouldn't be a tearing at that time. Okay, but now he says like this: when are we talking about for all the things we said above? Bishar hamesim chus me'avi v'imo. That's by other dead relatives, excluding your father and mother. Well, al aviv al imo, but with your father and mother, Kria ad shemagala es libo, you tear it until your heart is exposed. Now, it doesn't mean you tear through the flesh, okay? But it also doesn't mean you tear through, you don't tear through all your garments, he's going to say, but you tear like a big tear in the front. Yeah, more than a tafach. Umavdil sfasa beged, and you separate the lip of the beged. The ino korea bekli elabiyado mibachutz, and you don't tear with an implement, but you tear with your hands from outside. Sorry, mibachutz bifnei kol ha'am, outside, I guess, of the garment in front of the entire people. So that's like the public tearing. The korea, which might be why they do it at the time. What? Oh, I'll show you my failed attempt. I'll show you my failed attempt. The Kria es kol habagadim shalav, you tear all the garments that are on you. Ubeged hazeh hadabuk lebasaro inam akev. Now this is a weird phrase. The literally the sweat garment, what we call like the undergarment that clings to his flesh, inam akev. Now we use the term akev like it doesn't prevent you from fulfilling the obligation. I think he means here it doesn't like in the sense of like it doesn't what was that?
Hook?
You say hook?
As I think it's the literal meaning.
To stop, yeah. So I'm trying to think how I would translate it here. What happened?
This is
Hold
the
on.
wrong-
Oh, this one. Thank you. Yeah, we go to chapter 8.
What is the inama?
This is the
Yeah. Chapter 8.
I
Right?
would say not required.
Yeah.
And then other
Let's see here. Oops, went too far. The garment, where is he? His part, the border of the garment, he may not tear it with a utensil and must tear it outside. Depends on people. He must tear all the garments he's wearing. His underwear, i.e. the garments worn next to his flesh, need not be ripped. Right, so that's how they say it. Maybe it does mean ma'akev. I've just never seen the Ram use the word ma'akev. Usually you would think he would say, v'im lo kara. Well, I guess you could say, this is like l'chatchila, you don't need to tear it, right? Because I was going to say, usually he would say, and if he didn't tear the undergarment, yatsa, but this means you don't have to at all. Okay. Yeah. Oh, here's a side thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like usually when other people say inama, it means together.
Right. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, this is being used like a l'chatchila in a ma'akev. Question that you might want to ask one of your forebears. So one of my friends was the Rav of the Ashkenazic shul, or one of the Ashkenazic shuls in Seattle, is Rabbi Kletenik, who was a Talmud of Rav Aaron. And so I don't know if this comes from him, but Rabbi Kletenik, and I'm hearing this secondhand, so I'm going to pause the recording so I don't give halakhic on this information. Okay, so now that we've said the secret socks, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay. So and then here we get, and this is what you reacted to last time. If you change garments, then you are obligated to tear the new garments for all shiva, for your mom and father. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is something apparently we don't do nowadays, or at least Ashkenazim don't do this. You're obligated for your mother and father to remove your shoulder and your arm from your garment until your shoulder and arm are revealed. Kind of like the way I call like yeshivish tefillin jacket wearing. Yeah. And you walk like that in front of the bier. And then once your father or mother are buried, then you don't need to do that anymore. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that is how you do it for that. Okay. Now, what I wanted to show you was, now I know we haven't read the Rav stuff yet about Kria for your Rav, but this is, you're gonna see the Rav one is modeled after your Kria. So I had a failed first. Well, again, I had an attempt that I don't know whether it failed, and this is at 5 a.m. So I had texted Rav Pesach ahead of time, but I don't think he got the message until I was already like on the plane back to Seattle. So this shirt. And I only was masupik about this because I think I read something in Aruch Shulchan. Okay, so first of all, this was very tough, right? I didn't realize this, so I started tearing it with scissors. That didn't work, so I had to use pizza scissors. Okay, very tough. Yeah. I don't know why I wasn't thinking. That's really what happened. But then when I tore it, it tore along the seam, right? So I remember seeing that there are certain types of seam that tearing along the seam does count and ones that it doesn't. And I wasn't sure if there's machlokes on that. So I was like, oh man. so then I did another one. And the other one, so this I decided to just tear my favorite shirt. This was also kind of tough, but I did manage with the help of the pizza scissors to tear it down the middle for clearly more than a tavach. So this is like Mavil Hasafa, like two separate parts. I heard Torah when I heard the news. Yeah. So what happened was I had asked whether that was the case, and that was one of the questions I didn't get a response to in time, and I did it because that's what it seemed to me from the halachos. And so what Rav Pesach said was, let me just read his exact words, which was. So what I asked is I said that like with when at Danny Wolf's funeral, I remember seeing them tear at the actual thing, and that's what I'm sure I've seen people do Kria before, but it wasn't on my radar, so I don't know what was the norm. So he said that he says by a parent specifically. So he says Kria is done upon hearing the news, meaning of your Rebbe's death. By a parent specifically, people wait for a kiyum of bifarhesia, of public, but that does not apply here.
Okay, so
That's what, yeah. And yeah, it sounds like there's a separate din of farhesia by the parent. Yeah, right. I'm not sure why. Yeah, he doesn't. I don't think he mentions it. I mean, we'll have to look through again. Right. Yeah, Joseph.
When we see the, could they tear from like the buttonhole?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm not sure because I saw other stuff in. I thought I saw other stuff. Yeah, I don't know. And the other thing also is I thought I saw other stuff about distinguishing between horizontal tears and vertical tears, but I'm not sure about that. Like, I don't know if it would be considered like minatzad. I don't know. So I remember I remember seeing them start it with a.
I also remember seeing, is that like halacha?
Yeah, that's my guess. My guess is that saying you can't do it with a cleave means to rip with a cleave, but you can start it and then rip with your hand.
I'm wondering if maybe the halacha can't under the all, but they just had
yeah.
So it wasn't like
Right. Yeah. That could be. Yeah. And again, I only had time to look through the Rambam and the Shulchan and then ask for Pesach, but I haven't looked at other stuff yet. Yeah. So before we do the so another thing also. There's another shayla that I didn't have time to ask. So what happened? So the timeline was that, we on Thursday, then that was when we got the news that he was discontinuing dialysis. And when I was looking online, it says people can survive off dialysis for like a couple of days, sometimes a couple of weeks. But I knew that Rabbi Moskowitz had a lot of health problems, right. And that was unlikely. And then I also got inside info that he had actually stopped dialysis on Sunday, and they tried again several times and they couldn't do it. And so I was expecting that on Motzei Shabbos, of course, I would have to wait until Shabbos was over here, and so I actually did not end up waiting up because I knew I had to get some sleep. Woke up in the morning. And so I decided I would like get dressed, say my brachos and stuff like that, and then get ready to daven Hanetz before I looked at the phone. I accidentally saw a WhatsApp text with the word Baruch. So I didn't know if that counted as like getting the news, like, because technically speaking, like in terms of probability, of course, it's going to be Baruch Dayan Emes. But like, it could also be like a Baruch Hashem, like they got into dialysis or something, like, so like, I don't really know. So I didn't count that as getting the news. And then I looked at the news and then I did it then. Yeah. So what I wanted to relay, and this is an example of something that is, you could study any area of halacha theoretically, but then until you do it, it's a different experience. So when we were, at Pesach time, so at Pesach time, then I was learning with Johnny, my brother, and Ken, and we were doing the halacha of lo tisgodedu, of not gashing yourself in grief. So in the the Ovdei Avodah Zarah would physically mutilate themselves when they died, and like the only example I know of. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So the vivid example that I know of is in this book, a really good novel called Hawaii by James Michener, which is like historical fiction. Then when the Hawaiian queen dies, then her husband, who's not a king, but he's like a consort, takes a rock, bashes out his teeth, and then gouges out his eye, So what we were trying to do when we were learning the sugya, we were trying to understand like where that psychological need comes from, and then what it seems like intuitively, this is somehow a more modified form of that, But when I was imagining this, then when I imagined doing Kria, which I had never done before, I imagined, it was like, here's how I imagined. I was like, okay, I've been sad before. I've torn fabric before. This will be like doing it simultaneously. Okay. But it was not like that. And the actual best description is in Hilchos Shabbos. This halacha about Kria and Hilchos Shabbos. Yeah. So let me show this. Yeah. It's a really interesting Gemara. So it's in Hilchos Shabbos Yud. Okay. I'll give you a second to find it if you want. It's just one paragraph here. Sorry, okay. Hakorea kadei litfor shtei tefiros. So this is one of the 39 halachos, is Kria kadei litfor shtei tefiros, tearing in order to sew 2 stitches, right? Because in order for it to be a malacha, it has to be constructive. So if you just tear something destructively, then it's not a malacha, it's kilkul. But if you tear it as part of the sewing process, then it's constructive. Okay. So he says almanas litfor shtei tefiros chayav. If you do it with the intent to sew 2 stitches, you're liable. But if you tear to destroy, or for destruction, putter, your putter. Okay, it still is usher, but your putter from skila and chatas. Because you're destroying. Okay. Then he says, hakorea b'chamaso. If you tear in anger, o al meis shuchayev likroa alav, or if you tear for a dead person who you're obligated to tear on, chayev mipnei shemiyashet es dato b'davar zeh. You're liable because you settle your mind through this action. V'yanuach yitzro, and your yitzer is calmed. Okay, and since your wrath abates or subsides through this, harihu kimisakin, then it's like you're doing a constructive action, v'chayev, and you're liable. Okay, so in other words, what he's saying is it's not a destructive act; it's a psychologically constructive act because you're outletting your anger or your grief. And that actually registers halachically, which is like such a fascinating thing. And when I did the Kria, not the first one, when I did the real Kria, it did feel like a constructive, like I was like unleashing something, and had like a primal feel to it. And that gave me like an inkling. I didn't have any desire to engage in self-harm, but it gave me an inkling of what that must feel like for the Odi Vodazara when they like harm themselves about doing this. Yeah.
And when this is caring for someone you're talking about inherently, like in actuality, that actually inherently constructive. That maybe in the halachic sense it should be, but what if you just really hate the guys?
Well, so it's a good question because the first category is not dependent on halachic categories, right? Like when you're angry, right? So if that is good enough to count as masakin, so I'll give you an example, right? Is unless there's a halacha I don't know, then I don't do kriya on my parents because I'm a ger, right? But emotionally, it would be the same thing. Now maybe it's also for me to do it because of Baltashkis. I don't really know. I haven't looked into this issue at all.
I mean, if it actually had
that's true, right? Yeah, that is true. That's true, right? But that'd be an example. That would be an example, or the reverse example. Like you're saying, if it's your
let's just say you were like your birth related, but both of you were adopted, so you didn't really know the guy. Then hey, this guy.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like that person where it's not you don't even hate or like you just
right. That's a legitimate question. I mean,
hate saying no. He's saying that even though it's not actually in a psychological thing.
Yeah. Right. So I'm inclined to say that what actually matters is the emotional state, because since that's the only criterion for the anger, then I think it makes more sense to read this. Oh, al meshu chayav l'krolav is just like giving an example. Like obviously tearing for a mesa your chayav l'krolav is generally going to be something that you're doing out of grief, but it doesn't mean there has to be an actual halacha chiyuv. That's what I would think. Yeah.
Also, what were we just saying earlier that it's only proper kara if it's techamaso?
Yeah. Right.
So ergo, so what is it? So
Yeah, that's a good
it can't
question.
be ag because if to be a kosher kriya, it has to be shoftim.
Right.
Inherently, if it.
That's a good point also, right? So in other words, you're saying intrinsically that case has to be with the accompanying emotion, right?
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. That's a good argument. I would accept that. Okay, so now let's skip to chapter 9. Okay, where before you skip to chapter 9, the first time we encountered the halacha was in Hilchos Talmud Torah 5:9, which is a funny segue here. Okay, so 5, not funny haha segue, but like weird segue.
Well, that was a funny haha.
Yeah. Yeah. So he says, Ra'a es Rabo over al divrei Torah. If a person saw his Rav violating divrei Torah, Omer lo, then you say to him, Limad tanu Rabbeinu kach v'kach. Didn't our Rav teach us such and such? Which, by the way, one of the most irritating things. Do they drill this type of thing into kids about how to speak respectively to?
Probably the more.
Because there were high school students I had who would say in the most artificial way, if I made a mistake, right? If I made some sort of mistake, isn't it true that is a blah, 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 And I a couple times, I say, just tell me I'm wrong. stop, do this in mock game. It becomes a worse off thing. Let's say, I made a mistake in an area that I never taught you. And you say, Rebbe, didn't you teach us? No, slap, the whole thing about statements like this is it's supposed to be kavod. If it becomes irritating, then it's not kavod, So that's just my little. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll tell the story again because I like telling the story. I think I probably told us when we read it that when Rabbi Chait came to do the Q&A at our high school when the Zimmers were getting married, then there was a frum person in the audience who kept on raised their hand and got called on, and then does the rabbi hold by blah blah blah? Rebbe's like, what? Does the rabbi blah blah blah? And Rabbi Fox says, she's talking about you, because Rebbe wasn't used to being called in the third person. Yeah. Okay. The al yomar davar shalom. V'chol zman shemazkir Shmuel b'fanav. Anytime you mention a received teaching that was from him and you mention it in his presence, Omer lo, you should say kach limad tan Rabbeinu. This is what you taught us. The al yomar davar shalom b'shama mirabo. Don't say anything that you didn't hear from your Rav. Ad shiazkir shem omro, until you say the name of the one who said it. That's a weird halacha, right? How is that akim and kavod? Rav.
Wait, what is that?
You don't say something in front of your Rav that you heard from someone else unless you mention the name of the person who you heard it from. Let's say I didn't know who I heard it from, I shouldn't say that in front of my Rav. That's strange, yeah?
Well, otherwise you're saying you're as great as your Rav to say things without being a source. And therefore, if you don't say with the name, then you're saying it's your own thing.
No, but why can't you say, I heard this from someone I don't know who it is? Yeah. I gotta imagine that you could do that. Let's see if Rav Mabili comments. He says, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that people don't think that your Rav said it.
No.
Maybe he disagrees. But if he says something in the name of his Rav, he doesn't need to cite the matter explicitly because it's clear that he learned from his Rav Muvhak.
Yeah, it's not in front of. It's not in front of.
Yeah,
that makes more sense. That makes more sense. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, Ukashiyamus Rabo. Now here's this is the weird thing. He just seamlessly transitions. Ukashiyamus Rabo, and when his Rav dies, he tears all of his garments meaning all the garments he's wearing until he reveals his heart. There's one more paragraph. And he doesn't sew it forever. Now it's weird because these first couple clauses seem to have to do with how you treat the kavod of his relationship to divrei Torah, right? Kria sounds like a different different phenomenon, So it's weird that that's just thrown in at the end. And then this is where the Rambam, and then from here, the Rambam makes the distinction about Rav Muvhak. When are we talking about for all of these things in all the previous halachos in this chapter? But Rav Muvhak, that's with his main Rav, that he learned the majority of his wisdom from. But if he did not learn the majority of his wisdom from him, then that's a, how do we translate Talmud Chaver in the, a fellow student, yeah, that's good. A fellow student of Eno Chayav he's not obligated in honoring him in all of these things. About Omed Milafanav, but he should stand up in his presence. But Kria alav kashim shu Kria al kol hamesim shu misabaleim. He should tear on the chacham in the same way he tears upon all of the other relatives. Right. So in other words, Rav Muvhak is like Av and Aim. Regular chacham or Talmud Chaver or regular Rav is like the other 5 relatives, which we're now going to read. Yeah. Okay. So back to Hilchos Avel, chapter 9. So he starts off with this mending thing. Okay, Kol haKaraim shekreya adam ashal krovav. All the other tears that a person tears over his other relatives. Sholel hakera la'achar shiva. He can shola. There's probably precise seamstress terms for these things. Sorry, the seamstress is something we don't say in 2022. Can men be seamsters? Seams persons.
I like
Tailoresses, please. Yeah. Seamster, yeah. Anyway, so sewy people. Okay. So there's probably a good sewy people term for this, which is shola is tofer b'chutim refuim, sewing with loose threads. Tefirish ena yetziva, a non-permanent mending. V'rak matzmid es hachalakim ha'kruim zelzeh. You just attach them to each other. So the closest thing to us, I think, is like safety pins. Let me just see what this is. Okay. Yeah. If you safety pin it together, so that's not intended to be permanent, but it does keep it together.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you can do that after Shiva. Okay. This is on the non-parental krovim. So you can do that after Shiva. And you can sew it up after Shloshim. But on your father and mother, you can clothespin it after safety pin it after 30 days. You can never stitch it. A woman tears and then safety pins it immediately. Even over her father and mother, because you don't want it flapping open or whatever. Okay. All right, so that was just the mending thing. Now he goes into these other cases of when you do a full kriya. Just as a person tears on his father and mother, Torah, so too he is obligated to tear over his Rav who taught him Torah, which we understand from that other halacha to mean your Rav Muvhak. Okay, it sounds from here that it just means any Rav, but it was very clear in that other halacha that he meant not just a Rav who teaches you any Torah. Because that would be like other krovim. Val hanasi, again the nasi himself. Val av beistin. Val rov tzivur shnerag, which Makbili says rov does not mean here majority. It means like a multitude of people who were killed. It's like a massacre. I don't know what the number is. Val birkas Hashem, and on hearing an instance of blaspheming the divine name. Val sefer Torah shenisraf, and on the sefer Torah that's burned. Val Ar Yehuda, and on the cities of Judah. Val Yerushalayim, and on Yerushalayim Val Mikdash, and on the Mikdash. Okay, yeah.
Wait, is Yerushalayim that considered? Is there a possibility Yerushalayim is not? Because he said, or is he saying if you live in a time when Yerushalayim is not part of Yehuda, that's destroyed?
Maybe. I mean, I
know from the Gemara definitely means right after
interesting. I would think that is there a possible nafkamina that you tear once when you go into Ar Yehuda? Let's say you can't see Yerushalayim, right? And then once you get to Yerushalayim, you tear again. You can't just count Yerushalayim as another one of the Ar Yehuda. That's what I would guess.
Can you do a Mikdash in Yerushalayim?
Yeah, the Rambam might even talk about that. I don't know if I've read it. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, Kol Elu HaKaraim, all of these tears, Kria Ajmagalas Libru, you tear until you reveal your heart. You never sew it up. Even though you can't sew it, I'm going to use the word stitch. Even though you can't stitch it, Mutter l'shalalan, you can clothespin it or safety pin it. Lamalalan ulalakatan. Okay, lamalalan, he says, is litzfor rock kamatfiris, is a few stitches, right? Like staple it basically, right?
Mhm.
Lelakatan is litfor tfiros mefuzaros, to make like scattered stitches, right? Like not all in a row. Kamin velocos kamin sulmos, and to make like ladders, like I guess like shoelaces, right? Like that. Lo asru ela bi'ichui Alexandri bavad. They only prohibited an Alexandrian stitching, which is what we would call like sewing, right? Like making like proper stitches. Afilu hafach hakli, even if he turned the beged inside out, I think that's hafach. Manasas sfasa lamata, and upside down, and the lip of the beged is now below. Lo ya'ache, he cannot mend it. Yeah, in other words, don't think that it has to be in the same place on the beged. Like, don't think, like, once I turn it upside down, I'm using the beged in a completely different way and I can sew it. Now, but this is the weird thing. Just as the seller is usher, it doesn't mean to his sister, it means to stitch it, okay? So to the buyer. So if I sell that shirt to you, I have to tell you this thing can never be sewn, which means that it's a din in the beged, not even in the beged as I'm wearing it or in connection to me, which is a strange thing that like it resides in the beged. Let me see what this is. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Right. So that's a strange halacha. How do you know that you tear on your rav as you do on your father? As it says, this is what Elisha cried out when Eliyahu, is it not diplomatic to say was killed, according to the Radak, right? Eliyahu burned up in the atmosphere, okay, not just taken up to heaven or spirited off to Gan Eden, like other Mufarshim hold. Avi Rechav Yisrael Farashav, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. V'lo ra'ahu od, and he didn't see him any longer. V'yichazek b'vgadav v'yikra'im l'shayim karim, and he grabbed his garments and he tore them into two tears. Mikan shachayv l'havdil hasafa. From here, one is obligated to separate the lip, meaning that it needs to be two separate pieces. I do wonder if you hold that Eliyahu didn't die. So then, like, I guess you have to hold that this is like a loose asmachta. Like, how do we learn out Kria on Mis Rabbi Muvhak if Eliyahu didn't die, right? Yeah.
It's already not kind of, so it can't be that.
Right. So that's the interesting thing, right? Because it's clear that Kria on the seven krovim is midoraisa, it seems, right? Because it's from the pasuk of Bigdechem Lo Sifrom, right? Or it's part of Avilos Deoraisa. I don't know what we hold the statuses of these Krios here. It feels like a Durbanan. Yeah, Kiyum chavurah. That's true. Right. Put it in there. Right. He puts it in both places. Yeah, that's a good point.
You're saying what did Elisha do?
So he tore his garment, but in the story, Eliyahu is taken up to Shemayim, and right. So like, if he didn't actually die, if you hold he died, so then you could definitely learn from there that you tear on the death of your rebbi. But if he didn't die, and they hold that he, like the people who hold that he didn't die, hold that he's in Gan Eden on earth. So there's nothing that says if your rav like goes overseas, then you tear Kria.
Did Elisha know that he didn't die if you hold like that?
It's a good question. I mean, I assume if we know it, then they must have.
Only say that only added
That what? Yeah, I mean, there's agadas, but there's also like the psukim say your Lord will be taken from you, and like there's yeah.
Like aren't the psukim talk about coming back at the end of times?
Yeah. But it's unclear, first of all, I think, first of all, it's also unclear whether Eliyahu Hanavi is Eliyahu Hanavi, I think. I've seen someone say that Eliyahu might be someone different because it is, I know there's a whole midrash with the Vav that he lent Yaakov or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I always assume that like, Tchias Mason would be an easy way to answer that part at least. Yeah. Okay. Let's actually, in the interest of time here, since we read that, I want to go to the Chacham stuff. Look at halacha, same parak, halacha. Look at halacha yud aleph actually. It's a little bit earlier than we need to. Anyone who is standing with the corpse at the time when its soul departs, chayav likro, is obligated to tear. Even though it's not one of his relatives. Adam kasher shemes, so too a kosher person. Okay, not speaking cannibalistically. Everyone is obligated to tear for him. even though he is not a chacham, according tefach kishar haveil, and you tear a tefach like other mourners.
For what?
An adam kasher. So here it says in the bottom in Rambam Bekius, adam kasher nir shemashmaus mish huchzak b'dikduke hamitzvos is someone who is has a reputation for. Hold on, I gotta check this again. Someone who has a reputation for precision in mitzvos or meticulousness in mitzvos. Shehu yodua kumi shemakpid b'mitzvos medaktik. Okay, let us the poskim according to the poskim medubar. Okay, this is not according to the. Okay, maybe it is. Let us poskim according to the poskim medubar nochachos hameis. That's talking about if you're present in the presence of the mace. Kagon shenimsa b'halvayas hameis, like you find yourself in the in a funeral procession of the mace. So in other words, he's saying, sounds like what that last part is saying is with a, let's say with a chacham or with anyone who you're obligated to tear on, you tear Kria when you get the news.
Right.
But Adam Kasher, it's not like, if we had to tear anytime an Adam Kasher died,
Yeah.
that would be a lot of torn clothing, right?
Yeah.
You know, people were medaktik mitzvahs. I mean, I feel like there's you know, there's more of those. All right, yeah, I don't know.
I feel like anything that often
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. So he's saying that if you find yourself encountering a dead Adam Kasher, then you tear. And that actually fits in a little bit better with the halacha, because the halacha is if you're standing with a corpse, then you tear. Or likewise for an Adam Kasher who dies, you know, like, you know, if you find yourself there, right?
What do we all need to do that at like a Leviathan for
an Adam Kasher, yeah.
well, like you said, isn't that?
Yeah, so that's another question I have is I'm not aware of people doing that, but maybe I haven't been to
Or is
Levi's Adam Kashers. I don't know.
Maybe is Adam Kasher a higher bar than we're thinking?
That could be also. I mean, medaktik, like I'm saying, being medaktik with all the mitzvahs is pretty good. Okay. Also, the problem perpetuates itself because if this is the norm and people aren't keeping that halacha, then you're not going to get any kashers. Okay. Okay, this is where it gets a little dicey. Okay, these next two paragraphs. This I don't feel confident in my understanding of all these. Well, first of all, this is an interesting lesson. A chacham who dies, hakol krovav. Everyone is his relative. Okay, now it's interesting. He says everyone is his relative, as opposed to what he said by the Adam Kasher. Hakol chayavin likroa alav. Everyone is obligated to tear on him. So it does sound like you know there is in some sense a din of karov for a chacham intrinsically, you know, and you're tearing because it's like a karov died. It's not like it's not like the Torah says, oh, see that chacham over there? You're not related to him, but for chachamim you tear like a relative. He's saying no, chachamim are relatives, and therefore you tear the relative tear. You know, conceptually it's different. Until they reveal their heart. So unlike an Adam Kasher, you tear like a. So this is interesting, right? You tear like a parent. Didn't he say earlier? Did he say earlier that by a chacham in Hilchos Torah? Yeah, like Shar Krovov. Yeah, so that's problematic. That's a contradiction. Right. Okay, let's see what's going on though. I'm on the wrong page, and I'm on the wrong scrolling. Over here. Yeah, the whole team mean, and you do the shoulder out of the thing for on the right side. Okay, this is another one that I want to look into more. The base midrash of that chacham shuts down for 7 days, and that's another weird thing. Or you would kind of think that like, oh, we should learn his Torah, you know, like. Or we should be learning Torah, you know, but you know, I feel bad for the people, and if they had the what do you call it? The custom of doing the siyumim on like Mishnah or something, like these guys lose out 7 days, you know. But it is interesting. I mean, I have no idea if this has to do with like an acknowledgement of how much the base midrash was dependent on his Torah, you know, or if it's an idea of like, you know, some pseudo idea of like, there's no Isser Talmud Torah for a Talmud when his rebbi dies, but there is Isser Talmud Torah for a mourner when they're doing other mourning. Yeah.
What's the qualification for what's your interest? In case of think of this, also like you were going to be Rosh Hashiva, who is at this point just too old to really do much teaching.
Right. So here's my guess. My guess is that in Hilchos Talmud Torah Perek Hey, when it says it's usher to be cholik al rabo, which means to start your own base midrash, like outside of his jurisdiction. So I don't know what the parameters of that are, but I'm guessing that whatever those parameters are, that's what defines his base midrash. I don't know though. Yeah. Okay. Ukvar nahagu talmidei chachamim b'chol makom likro ze al ze tefach. This is even weirder. Talmidei chachamim are already noheg to tear a tefach for each other. Even though they're equal and none of them learn from their friend. But didn't he just get through saying that if a chacham dies, then you tear until you reveal your heart, unless he's differentiating between a chacham and a talmid chachamim? That might be it. So a chacham who dies, then you tear until you reveal your heart. But talmidei chachamim, disciples of the wise, are that's only a tefach. So what lashon did he use in Talmud Torah? What do you say in Talmud Torah? Talmud Chaver, yeah, Talmud Chaver, right. So, and he doesn't specify tefach or not. So I mean, this does fit into read that if it's a talmid, then you tear like other krovim, right? Because it says so that's like a tefach. And then here, so you basically have three levels, right? You have a talmid chachamim who you tear a tefach for like other relatives. You have a chacham who you tear ad shemagala libo, but not all of the strictures of your Rav Muvhak. And you have your Rav Muvhak where you go the full way, like father and mother.
So does that mean that we have to tear for a lot of people? The number of people that I thought I had to tear for has greatly inflated.
Yeah. So here's the other thing I also don't know, and I'm saying this completely out of nowhere, just out of speculating for why we don't do this. I mean, halacha was not designed for a world where every single Talmid Chacham who dies is all over Twitter, So I don't know if a lot of the nihugim change. Like, first of all, this whole thing so Talmidei Chachamim are nahagu. That's a nihu. Sounds like the Chacham is an intrinsic din. Yeah, I don't know what we do nowadays for that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, isn't there also a weird thing with this where people do nowadays what we've heard does not records very badly with the Gemaras. Okay, fine. I guess fine with that part, but
yeah, I don't know.
I guess there's also stuff we don't do.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. Also, a lot of this available stuff in general, I feel like a lot of it is based on minhag or goes by minhag. Like the whole kfiyas hamita, we don't do that anymore. Right. Yeah. And then Ken was telling me, I didn't see this in the Rambam, but I also didn't look. I didn't read through all the prakim that serving a meal with basar and yayin after the chavurah.
What?
The sudas havelim, is that a thing?
I
haven't looked at all of those avails in a while, so I have never heard anyone doing that except the Irish, and they call that a wake. That's not that's a different thing. That's drunkenness. But okay, so let's finish this up though. Kol hakorin al hachacham shemeis, anyone who tears over a chacham who died, once they turn their faces away from the beer, shololi, and then they can safety pin it. Now he says two things that are his chidushim, because remember the Rambam's rule is whenever he says yirali, that means he did not get this from a source. Right. Okay. It seems to me, so that someone who tears on a chacham can sew it up the next day. Even when your rebbi dies, you only mourn for him for one day. O yom misa, o yom shmua, either the day of death or the day of the news. Now, tell me why you reacted that way, because I also reacted that way. Yeah. So if he's trying to prove about when you can sew it up for a regular chacham, don't bring a proof that you only are misabel for your rav on one day, because, okay, first of all, what does he mean by misabel on your rav, right? This is the only place where the Rambam implies that there's an actual chiyuv avelus on your rav. Right. There's Kria on your rav, so what does he mean misabel alav? And then furthermore, let's say this is true. Let's say you misabel from one day. Well, that doesn't mean that you can sew it up. You never sew it up.
Right.
So how can you use that as a proof to say that for a
Yeah.
regular chacham that you can sew it up the next day? I feel like I'm missing something basic here, Yeah. Right.
Like if there's some idea of like so or for these other people there's an inherent eternal thing, but you're saying for a chacham there's no idea of eternality, so it just goes based off the avelus, and therefore for chacham, if your rabbo whose avelus only lasts one day, the chacham who only has avelus but no eternality, so to not resewing could last at most as long as your Rabbi Muvhak's avelus.
I hear what you're trying to do, and I like the approach, but what was my problem? Oh yeah, so I'm still hung up on this idea of misabel for your Rav. Like there's no other expressions of avelus I'm aware of, Sounds like you have to do a Kria. Oh, sorry, one more halakha here that I want to do. Chacham sheba'a shmuaso shemes. If news comes that a chacham died, ein korin alav ela b'shas hesped, then you only do kriya at the time of hesped. V'zehu kvoda, and that is for his kavod. So that might be why we don't tear on every chacham that we see, because we don't go to the hesped. But if we did, then you'd have to do it. If you had a hesped here, then you might have done it. I don't know, but I didn't see anyone else do kriya at Danny Wolf's funeral.
Who did?
The family. Yeah, so I wonder why he was. If he's not a chacham, then I don't know who is.
Is this particular to the Rambam at all?
That could be. Yeah, this might not be how we pass it. That's true. V'sholol bo b'yom, and then you can say tikkun that day. And you can sew it up the next day. That's also strange, right? Because he brought down. Oh, this is in the case of Shmuel. Shmuel Rechoka. Yeah. Okay, so those were the main halachos I wanted to go over. Kind of maybe want to do avelus stuff, especially because it's like going to be Tisha B'Av before we know it. But yeah, what do we want to do tomorrow? Shtei lechem? Okay, right. I kind of want to do shtei lechem. I got to get Shavuos mentality. All right, let's stop here for today. All right, thanks for coming. Yeah.